President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. During this afternoon session, the chamber continues hearing the testimony of civil party Denis Afonso, or civil party TCCP1. Good afternoon, Madam Civil Party.
Bonjour, Monsieur.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Mr. President.
The President, Madam, I am Nulnon, the President of the trial chamber. I would like to ask you a few questions. First, what is your name?
Oui, je m'appelle.
My name is Denise Afonso.
The President, thank you, Madam. Can you also please tell the chamber when you were born?
Je suis née le 20.
I was born on the 22nd of November 1944 in Phnom Penh.
The President, thank you. Where do you live now?
J'habite en France.
I currently reside in France. I live in the south of France, in Grasse, on Avenue 7 des Roms.
The President, thank you. What do you do for a living?
Je suis retraitée.
Mr. President, I am currently retired. I was a civil servant at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I also worked for the European Union. And I've been retired since 2009.
The President, can you also tell the chamber, please, what your parents' names are?
Mon père s'appelait Maurice.
My father was called Maurice Lucien Afonso. He was a French national. And my mother was called Travung Tile. She was Vietnamese.
The President, thank you. What is your current husband's name and how many children do you have?
Mon époux actuel s'appelle.
My husband's name is Robert Herman, and we do not have any children together.
The President, thank you. What is your nationality?
Je suis française.
I am French.
The President, thank you. Madam Afonso, as the civil party before this chamber, you will be given the opportunity to make a statement of suffering and the expression of the harms and injuries inflicted on to you, including both physical and psychological harms, the harms that have been resulted directly or indirectly from the crimes.
Qu'est-ce que je te dis?
The President, we would continue this. Indeed, I am reading out something that you, Madame Afonso, should know, and indeed the opportunity would be given to you to make such a statement at the end of your testimony if you would wish to do so. Do you understand this, Madame Afonso?
Oui, je comprends.
Yes, I understand.
The President, thank you. Madam Afonso, can you also tell the chamber who sitting next to you is? Is he your counsel?
C'est mon avocat.
Yes, he is my lawyer. His name is Julien Rivet.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, Mr. President.
The President, thank you. Next, the chamber would like to inform the lead co-lawyers for the civil parties that according to Internal Rules 91 bis of the ECCC, lead co-lawyers for the civil parties will be given the opportunity to put questions to the civil party first before the other parties to the proceeding. Both the co-prosecutors and the lead co-lawyers for the civil party will have this whole afternoon to put questions. Counsel Pick Ong. Thank you, Mr. President and Your Honors. The undersigned counsels who will be putting questions to Madame Afonso are Counsel Som Sokung and Emmanuel Sagumi. However, I may also wish to inform Mr. President and Your Honors that Mr. Julien Rivet is now present near Madame Afonso. We would like to know whether it is required by the chamber that request for recognition of this counsel is made. The President, thank you, Counsel. Indeed, the request should be made as the procedural formality. However, may the Chamber be advised as to whether this counsel has already been recognized before the Bar Association of Cambodia. Counsel Pick Ong, Thank you, Mr. President. This council has already been in the team who has been authorized by the Madam Denise Afonso, and council has already taken an oath before the appellate court. The President, if the council has already been recognized long ago, what would be your request now? Council Big Ong. Thank you, Mr. President. Factually, during each and every beginning of the hearing, recognition would be asked or made, a request would be made for recognition of counsel. However, counsel for the time being is now present next to Madam Civil Party. We do not know whether it would be also the same procedural formality that counsel also need to be recognized, or whether it is required or not for the time being, or should he appear in this court personally to make sure that he should be recognized directly, or can we also do this now?
C'était la défense qui demande défense.
The President, Judge Laoyan, you may now proceed.
Oui, merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm not certain the Chamber has entirely grasped this situation. Were you asking whether Mr. Julien Rivet is registered with the bar here in Cambodia, or that he needs to accompany Ms. Denise Afonso? Are you seeking his accreditation as an international lawyer before the extraordinary chambers of the courts of Cambodia?
Counsel Big Ong, so far we have not sought any recognition of this council as yet. Counsel Simonofo would like to shed light on this.
Yes, I shall attempt to clarify matters. Mr. Julien Rivet is a member of the Cambodian bar. He has pledged his allegiance. He has been given a power of attorney by Madame Denise Afonso, but the attorney who shall be posing questions is Mr. Emmanuel Jacomi, who works within the same team and who is also one of the lawyers representing Madame Denise Afonso. I hope this is clear now. Does the Chamber wish for Mr. Ong Pik to introduce Mr. Julien Rivet as international counsel, as is routinely done, or is this unnecessary?
The President, during this stage, counsel who is accompanying Madam Civil Party Denise Afonso is there only to support her, and that Council is not engaged in putting questions to the civil party. For this reason, it is not required by the Chamber for recognition to be made during this stage. So when he appears before the Chamber in this courtroom, such recognition will indeed be very much needed. You may proceed. Counsel Som Sokung. Very good afternoon, Your Honor, Mr. President, Your Honors, and good afternoon, Madam Denise Afonso. Counsel Som Sokung, do you hear me, Madam?
Oui, je vous entends.
Yes, I do hear you, counsel.
Question. Madam Afonso, I have a few questions to put to you. And during the first segment of my question, I would like to ask you about the events prior to 1975. My first question is as follows. Before 1975, the April of 1975, where did you live?
I was living in Phnom Penh. My address in Phnom Penh was called Ok Ma. I do not recall very well. I was living on a street close to the military pensions unit, which was not far from the Chinese hospital. However, I'm unable to cite the exact name of the street I was last residing in when I was living in Phnom Penh.
Question. What did you do for a living during that period of time, indeed prior to 1975 of April?
Alors, avant...
Before April 1975, I carried out various duties. I was working as secretary for several companies, and the last position I held at the time was with the cultural service at the Embassy of France. I began working for the French Embassy in 1973, and up until 1973, I worked for a private company that was called Commune Khmer. The company had as its mission to produce condensed milk.
Question. You stated that you worked at the French Embassy. During the time you had worked,
Yes, I was with the cultural attaché with the Embassy of France. I was working there as secretary.
Counsel, thank you, Madam. With regard to the situation prior to April 1975, can you please describe to the Chamber what you saw to be the situation in Phnom Penh?
Eh bien,
When Sihanouk fell from power, and when Lon Nol, who was pro-American, tumbled from power, the civil war began. From that day onwards, every single day, we were given orders and requests, life became increasingly difficult. Do I continue? Life and living conditions became increasingly difficult. People lived in fear. People were awaiting peace. People were awaiting the end of the war so that peace would finally reign. People were awaiting the victory of the Khmer Rouge. From that point onwards, when the Khmer Rouge continued to pillage cities and shelling, the city plunged into darkness. Up until 1972, when I was still working for Commune Khmer, I knew that we would have very much difficulty in maintaining raw commodities. It was only at that time that I entered the French embassy. Life carried on, but conditions were very difficult at the French embassy every single day. I was receiving dispatches. I was receiving news dispatches. We were being told that soldiers and warriors were displacing the population and were destroying villages. I received such alarming news at my home, and I told my husband, I told the father of my children this piece of news. He was of Chinese ethnicity, and he was a staunch communist. And he told me this was only propaganda. And because he was listening to radio broadcasts from Peking. He said that people were happy. And the situation only worsened. And that was when the French authorities began instructing their citizens to leave Cambodia. However, I did not follow the instruction. I decided to stay. I stayed with the father of my children. I stayed in Cambodia. My husband believed and was totally convinced that the communist regime would not cause any harm onto its people. Therefore, we stayed. And we remained stuck in hell.
Thank you, Madam. Another question concerning the period prior to 1975. You mentioned that you had received information concerning the evacuation of people, and you also learned the information that people were smashed in certain villages where they arrived.
Là, j'ai pas très bien compris la question.
I would like to repeat my question. You testified earlier that you had received information when you were working at the cultural attaché of French embassy. You learned the information that wherever the Khmer Rouge arrived, they would destroy that village. And you also learned information that people were to be evacuated. When did you hear that information?
At that particular time, I got all my information from Agence France Presse. Between 73 and 75, 1973 and 1975, I heard this sort of news, and it got through the Agence France Presse, AFP. It came on the embassy fax machine.
Regarding the information you received from media or from the embassy fax, aside from the evacuation of people, did you hear any other news?
Bien entendu, tous les jours.
Yes, of course. Every day you saw crowds of people who had been evacuated from neighboring villages trooping into town, and they told us what was happening in their villages. These people were refugees coming into the capital who were telling us all about all of this.
Did you know why people were moving toward Phnom Penh? Why didn't they leave for other directions of the country?
Because the country was at war all around, and the capital city was the only place where they could find a certain level of safety.
Thank you, Madam. I have another question concerning the 17th of April 1975. At the time you were living in Phnom Penh and you were working with the cultural attaché of the French embassy in Phnom Penh. Can you tell the court what was the situation like on the 17th of April 1975? What was the overall situation of Phnom Penh on the 17th of April 1975?
Before the 17th of April 1975, we were having a holiday for the Chochnam public holiday on the 14th and 15th of April. So everybody was at home. And then on the 17th, that was the day when I was supposed to go back into the office. And that morning, I was getting ready to leave for the office, and hardly had I left the front door than I heard people cheering in the streets and gunfire coming from everywhere. So I tried to see what was going on, and I saw a deliriously happy crowd that was busy welcoming the liberating Khmer Rouge troops. Everybody was glad, but these so-called liberation forces, I qualify this today, were dressed in black. They had extremely callous expressions on their faces and red eyes, and I thought, there's danger here. I tried to tell my husband, what we can do here is get to the French embassy. But it was already impossible to get out because all the streets had been cut off and everywhere was cordoned off. We were in the southern part of the capital and the embassy was in the north, and it was absolutely impossible to cut through. So we were cut off. There was no longer any working telephone or any working communication systems. But everybody seemed to be extremely pleased because they were saying, at last, there will be peace again. Well, that just wasn't the case.
Thank you, Madam. On the 17th of April 1975, were the people of Phnom Penh evacuated?
No.
No. No, on the first day we were still in our houses because when they got there it was 7 or 8 a.m. and on the first day they left us in our houses. I can remember it was extremely hot, and I can remember seeing this Chinese communist, the father of my children, going out into the street with cans of beer to thank these troops for what they had done. It was only the next day that they actually ordered us to leave our homes.
Thank you. On the 17th of April 1975, can you describe the situation inside the French embassy on that day?
Monsieur.
So, as I have just said, from the 17th of April 1975, I never set foot in the French embassy. I was at home on the morning of the 17th of April, and I was meant to go back to the office, but I never got there.
Thank you. For your family members, when were your family members evacuated?
We all left the city together. Everybody left together the day after. The next day, they patrolled through the streets, told us to pack our luggage. Don't take too much. You're going to be leaving your homes for 2 or 3 days. You will be coming back. We want to take you out of range of US bombs. But before you go, leave us the keys of your houses. As my children's father was an extremely docile individual and who always believed that everything was for the best, we only took half of the provisions we needed and left some stocks at home. We left. I took all my things, the children's school books, my identity papers, and most of what I owned in terms of personal goods, and we left the same day. Before we left, I stood in the street in front of the front door, and we gave them the keys to the house, and we said, here you are, this is your house, this is your apartment, here are the keys, and off we went.
Thank you. You said when you were leaving your house, you saw Khmer Rouge soldier. What were they wearing at that time? I mean, the uniform they were wearing.
We had a Ford car, and we took the car. As I said, we wanted to go north to the embassy, but the roads were cut off, and they sent us southwards. Just before we got to the Chinese hospital, we met with 3 Khmer soldiers. They were dressed in green, not in black, but in green, and they were coming out of a knick-knack shop that they had just pillaged. They had bags that were full of all sorts of goods. I don't really know what. There was also a pharmacy next by. And they stopped our car, and Mr. Singh, the father of our children, said, we don't have much more petrol to advance. And they said, well, wait there. One of the 3 went away, and then he came back with some cans of petrol. They filled up the tanks, loaded their things onto our car, climbed onto the roof, and shot into the air. And that was how we got out.
Thank you, Madam. I need to expand further on that, but with more questions. Before you were evacuated, you saw Khmer Rouge soldier hanging around in front of your house. What was their uniforms, and were they arms when they were about to ask you to leave your house?
They were armed, but they didn't aim their guns at us. Their orders were very clear. They were dressed in black with red and white scarves and what we called Ho Chi Minh sandals. But they were dressed in black, and they were armed.
When they told you to leave your house, like other Phnom Penh city dwellers who were asked to leave their houses, did you see if people resisted this order? What would be the consequence of resisting such an order?
Well, nobody resisted where I lived. Everybody did what they were told. What I did learn afterwards was that some people stayed behind. I had a school friend, for example, who stayed to wait for her husband. Her husband never came back, and she herself was executed. She was killed on the spot. And her brothers and sisters later told me how she died. So, if we hadn't left, they would have taken us for traitors and imperialists and people who were in the pay of the old regime, and they would have massacred us.
After you left your house, which direction were you heading for?
encore une fois.
Once again, it was the 3 soldiers who were sitting on the roof of the car who guided us. We left the city by the southern exit and we headed for Takmau.
Nope. When you were guided away out of Phnom Penh through Takmau, did you want to go through that direction?
Pas du tout.
Certainly not. I wanted to go to the French embassy, which was in the north of the city. You couldn't take the route north.
Thank you, Madam. Now, regarding your departure out of Phnom Penh toward the southern part of Phnom Penh, could you tell the court the overall situation of the people who were marching out of the city? What was the overall condition of those people like?
It was indescribable chaos. It was extremely hot in the streets, and here and there you saw people walking on foot, on bicycles. They were carrying their possessions, walking under the sun with their children who were crying with them. I wasn't far from the Chinese hospital, and I saw the sick coming out of the hospital on stretchers. Everybody was evacuated. Everybody headed off in that direction. We were all herded in the same direction. We, in that inferno, had a little bit of luck because we had a car, and we therefore took a little less time to reach the first stop-off point than others. But hardly were we out of the city. After Takmau, there was a roadblock. The Khmer Rouge asked us for our identity papers. They searched the car. They threw all the children's school books out of the car. They took my passport, and I told them I was French. Here is my French identity card. But they took absolutely no account of that whatsoever. They tore the whole thing to pieces, and they said, as of today, there are no longer any French or any Vietnamese or any Chinese. Everybody is Khmer. Go forward, Angkar is waiting for you. That was the first time I heard the word Angkar. Who was Angkar? I didn't understand there and then who Angkar was. And we moved forward, and I started to cry, thinking of the children and all of their school books, all our memories that had been destroyed in the space of a few minutes. The streets were also littered with banknotes. We had a couple of million of real that we had hid in the school books, hoping that we would be able to use them at some stage. When we reached Chamkarmon, outside in the street, we saw a good many corpses that were rotting.
I have my last 2 questions, and I will then hand over to my colleague to continue our line of questionings. Now, I would like to expand further to the question I asked earlier. You said somewhere in Chamkarmon you also saw the decomposed bodies. Did you recognize the dead bodies? Were they the officials of the previous regimes, or were they the soldiers killed in the fightings, or what?
They were the corpses of Lon Nol soldiers.
Thank you, Madam. This is going to be my last question for now. When you were on the travel from Phnom Penh to Takmau, you might have observed the children or the elderly or the sick who were also being evacuated out of the city. Among them, there were pregnant women as well. Did you observe that those people were being treated in a better condition than others, taking into account their conditions?
Well, everybody was treated in exactly the same way. Those people had to leave their homes. They had to head off in whatever direction they were told by the soldiers, and they were given no assistance whatsoever. It was extremely hot. They got no help. The children who couldn't be carried on their parents' backs or on bicycles had to trail along behind. There was absolutely no assistance offered by the liberation troops, if you want to call them that, whatsoever. No help. It was every man for himself.
Thank you, Madam. And Mr. President, I do not have any further question. I would like to hand over to my esteemed colleague. And I take this opportunity to thank Madame Denise Afonso for a detailed account of the event. Thank you.
Je vous remercie, Maître. Ça va, j'ai pas débordé. J'essaie de pas.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Sukun. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon to the bench. Good afternoon, Madame Afonso. My name is Emmanuel Jacomi. I am a civil party lawyer, and I would like to also ask you some questions, beginning with some general questions on the period before 1975, and then asking you some things about the first forced transfer before moving on to the second one. Now, Madam, I'm going to ask some precise questions, so do your very best to answer precisely, because we have relatively little time. So, if possible, let's stick to the questions and answers as asked. On some general issues first. This isn't the first time that you have testified at a trial connected with the events we're discussing today. Can you please tell us in what other context you might have testified? Good afternoon, Council. I can answer that question. In 1979, when the Vietnamese arrived, they organized a trial in August 1979. I was in Siem Reap. They brought me down to Phnom Penh to testify in that trial. It was a trial organized in 1975, in August of that year, and I was summoned to testify. When you testified at that trial, were you asked to say anything that did not tally with the facts, or, on the other hand, to conceal things that were factual? Response. Everything I said in 1979, I said perfectly freely. The only thing I was told not to say was that the father of my children, Fu Tengseng, was a communist. That was the only detail I was asked to omit. And what about the other facts connected with what you endured? Is there anything else? Was there anything else that you were asked to conceal? Response: absolutely not. I said only the truth. I was asked to tell everything that I had gone through and lived through.
Thank you. Madame Afonso, you said just now that the situation in Phnom Penh prior to 1975 was rather difficult. Would you describe the situation as one of famine? Response: I wouldn't say that there was famine, because there was still food to be found. Obviously, supplies were in short supply. However, people were still able to feed themselves. Famine only befell us in 1975 when the cities were evacuated, when everybody was sent to the countryside, and when everybody was forced to engage in hard labor. Thank you very much, says Maître Jacomi. Question. A brief question with respect to your family. You said that your son was born in 1964, and at the time you were some 30 years of age. Is this correct? Answer: yes, that is accurate, counsel. Question: can you please tell us who the members of your family were at the time that you were evacuated, and please give us the ages of your children at the time? Response: the father of my children was approximately 38 years of age. My sister-in-law was about 36 or 37 years of age. My daughter was about 8 years old. My son was 10 years old. His name is Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques was born in 1964. Jenny was born in 1967 rather. Leng, the daughter of my sister-in-law, must have been about 17 years of age. There's another child of 12 years of age. I'm sorry, I do not have an exact recollection of the precise age. There was also the youngest child, who was called Ha, and who was 5 years of age. Question. Thank you very much. In response to a question posed by my colleague, you said that you took money, you took school books, you took some other goods. Were you able to keep them? Response: not at all. Everything was confiscated as of day one, within a matter of hours. Everything was taken away from us, and everything was destroyed. Counsel, thank you. Madame, I wish now to return to the issue of the first village that you arrived at. You say in your written record of witness interview that you lived in Ko-Tukville. Is this correct? Answer: yes, indeed. It was called Ko-Tukville. We slept in a pagoda, which was on the island. Counsel, thank you. Question. Can you please describe the living conditions in that village? Can you please tell us if you had enough to eat, and can you please describe the hygienic conditions? Answer. It was the first day after the evacuation. We had the bare minimum on us. We had some medications that we later bartered. But upon arrival in Ko-Tukville, we were forced to get rid of all of our colorful clothes. We had to get rid of our sandals. We had to walk barefoot. We had to obey all of the orders that were being issued by Angkor. We were forced to follow everything that Angkor said and work in the fields. From that day on, we had no running water, no electricity. We were living by candlelight. We were located just in the vicinity of the rivers, so we did have access to the river's waters. And about 1 week later, we were given some rice, and we had to mix the rice with corn. The chief of the village, who was living just next to our straw hut, came and visited us and asked how we were doing. Puseng, the father of my children, thought that we were being given special care. But in fact, he was a spy. In fact, he was trying to extract any piece of information that he could get. And Seng spoke extensively. Counsel, I understand what you are telling us, Madame. You were telling us that you were forced to work in that village. Now, your children were with you at the time. Were your children also forced into hard labor? Response: yes, the children were also forced into working for the village. They had to clear the forest. My son, for instance, had to accompany his father and clear land. The youngest and the other two could stay at home. But already from that point onwards, they were suffering from malnourishment. Counsel, thank you. During your interview before the co-investigating judges, and here I'm referring to D 22/36.1, 0034 6934 on the English ERN pages.
The President, Counsel, could you please be at a slower pace when reading the ERN numbers? And you are now advised to also slower your pace and observing some pause when putting questions and getting the responses from the civil party.
Yes, of course, Mr. President. The document referred to is D199/15, the interpreter corrects. Once again, on the ERN page 0034 6934, 0034 64 74 in Khmer, Madame, you talk about an open prison that was located in that village. And can you please tell us why you refer to it as an open prison? Response: yes, it was an open prison because we were being deprived of freedom. We were being spied upon. The Shlop, as is referred to in Khmer, were already there. They were monitoring the children. They were asking the children whether their father was armed. We did not have the right to leave the village. We were living on the island, and we were being watched over by the villagers. We were being watched over by the locals. And we were also being surveyed by some women, and the men were being monitored by the local men, who were in fact spies. You were being surveyed by the locals, but were you also being monitored by the Khmer Rouge? Response: the villagers had already been converted by the Khmer Rouge. How do I describe this? They had simply been converted. They simply did not bear arms. Counsel, thank you. Can you please tell us what happened to the father of your children in that village? Response: Mr. Singh was rather talkative. He had the police commissioner come to the village, and he asked for approval from the village chief to allow that police commissioner to come to the village. Every single day they spoke in English and French, and they carried on with their chats. The police commissioner was the first to be taken away. 1 week later, Khmer Rouge soldiers who bore arms came to the island, and they arrested other men of the village. They arrested a neighbor who was a teacher and another neighbor who was a soldier. And we were told, I was told, don't worry, Angkor just needs some information. That was on the first day. On the second day, I was told, don't worry, he's still alive. He just needs to be reformed. Angkor is simply re-educating him. And I never saw him again. 32 years later, I never received any news. I never heard anything from him or anything about him. You stated that your husband had been denounced. And do you know exactly why he was denounced? Answer, no. All I was told was that he was denounced. And Mr. Ting said that he had been disclosed by the police commissioner. But we were never told why. Thank you, madame.
Toujours sur ce village.
While you were talking about the village, before the co-investigating judges, you talked about an assembly in a pagoda called Pe Trok. And just for the record, I am referring to D199/15 on page 4. In French, 00342181, 00346932 on the English, and 00349113 in the Khmer. Madame Civil Party, can you please provide an account of what happened during that meeting and what the Khmer Rouge told you? Response. 32 years later, that meeting is still etched in my memory. I can still see that meeting very clearly in my mind. After our arrival in Tocqueville, we were summoned to a meeting in a pagoda. All of the refugees, everybody was summoned to that meeting. We were transferred from where we were to the pagoda. We were all gathered there, huddled, sitting on the floor, waiting. A few moments later, there was a group of officials, the Khmer Rouge. They were soldiers. They appeared. And they began delivering a speech, singing the praises of Angkor, talking about Angkor's victory. And afterwards, they told us, for you foreigners, before the victory, we told you to get out of the country. Why didn't you do so? And as for you, Khmer's living in Phnom Penh, you were told to join the front line. Why didn't you do so? And yet, you are here before us now. You are now our prisoners. We're not going to simply point a gun at you and shoot you. We are going to have you work for us, and we are going to kill you otherwise. That's what we were told, literally. Words that I will never forget. They then handed out sheets of paper, and they told us, you are going to write to us exactly what you did before. Angkor wants to know what you did in Phnom Penh. What did you do at the factory? What did you do at Sokile? This was the company that I was working for at the time. And I thought, well, perhaps if I disclose everything, I can go back to Phnom Penh. However, it was a trap. It was only a way for the Khmer Rouge soldiers to try and weed out the intellectuals from the others. Question: did you see the Khmer Rouge who were presiding over the meeting on a previous occasion? Response: no, never. No, I'd never seen those faces in my life. Question: were you told if these were significant figures, where they were from, who they were? Response: no, they did not introduce themselves, Council. There was no formal introduction. All they said was that they were speaking on behalf of Encore. They were all using pseudonyms. They were all referring to themselves as Ta. But they did not identify themselves by names. Question. Thank you. One final question with respect to your time at the village. Did you witness any discrimination being meted out amongst various categories of persons? Response. In that village, discrimination was not yet rampant or being applied. It was only in the second camp that there was blatant discrimination. There was a separation between the new people, the 17th of April people, and a clear segregation from the base people. And that was only from that point onwards that we were made aware of the distinctions between the two categories of people. Question. But during your time at Tocqueville, were you receiving the same food rations as the other villagers? Response. In the first camp, we could not make the distinction. We could still keep our individual dispositions. We were given a lot of corn. We were forced to eat corn, but we were able to keep our own cuisines, and we were only able to subsist because we could fish from the river. And that was how we were able to survive. But we did not suffer any discrimination, at least at that point, between the two peoples. I would like to now address the subject of your departure from Tocqueville. Madame, can you please tell us when and in what circumstances you left the village? Response. Let's just say, suppose that Seng was arrested in July 1975, and Kim had a list, and he told us, we have received this list from Encore Le, and you are on this list to leave. And I said, where? Where am I supposed to go? And he answered, you have to leave. And as I was getting accustomed to life in the village, I implored him. I said, could you please intervene? Could you please tell your son, ask your son to let us stay? And he said, my poor child, I cannot do anything. The order comes from above. Encore Le has decided, and not my son. You must leave. You have no choice. You will not return to Phnom Penh. You will never return to Phnom Penh. I don't know where they're taking you. My poor child. You have no choice. And so the next day, we were forced to take what we had, go back to the pagoda where we had met earlier, and get herded onto the trucks to be shipped away. Question. Do you know who else was on the list that Mr. Tien held? Response. We were already considered as a family of traitors. There was also the names of all families of whom the head of the family, the husbands or men, had already disappeared. Question. And on that list were there the names of villagers from Tocqueville? Response. No, there were only the names of refugees. There was only us. There were only the names of refugees from Phnom Penh. Counsel, thank you. Were you able to take your personal belongings when you left the village of Tocqueville? Response. At that point in time, we didn't have many possessions remaining because everything had been confiscated. Even the car that Mr. Singh had left was confiscated, and it was given to Mr. Tem, and he was even told, if Angkor needs it, here it is. We had nothing. We had a bottle and a kettle. We had practically nothing left. And we were dressed all in black, as was the order. We only had 2 sets of clothing. We didn't even have shoes. We were already walking barefoot. And I had to burn the 2 million reals that I had remaining in order to heat the pot, the last pot of rice that I was able to cook for my family. Counsel, thank you. Madame, can you please describe to the chamber the various stages of your transfer from the time that you left Côte Tocqueville to the destination of Phnom Liap, as well as the mode of transportation used? Response. Yes, of course. So the next day, there were Khmer Rouge soldiers who were armed. In the streets, there were military trucks. And they were waiting for us. And before we got onto the trucks, there was a final screening of people. The daughter of my sister-in-law took out a photo album, and there was also a photo of my father that had fell to the ground. And I saw it, and I collapsed in tears, and I pleaded, please let me keep this photo. This is the only souvenir I have remaining of my father. And then they herded us onto the truck like cattle. And it must have been around 9 a.m. The sun was already out. And rather than take a direct route from Côte Tocqueville to Phnom Penh, they actually took the westerly road. And that took a very long time. We traveled the entire day without any stops. Everybody needed to stop. Everybody had pleaded, where are you taking us? But they didn't say anything. They didn't stop. We couldn't go back to Phnom Penh. It was deserted. I thought we were going to stop somewhere. And yet we continued towards the north. But it was closed. And we traveled until nightfall. The moon was already out. And we didn't have any sense of orientation. And in fact, we had arrived in Tutsat. And then they unloaded us, again, like a herd of animals. And we were given a can of rice. But there was no water, there was no light, there were no candles, there was no water. And then I was instructed to walk towards the swamp. I took water from the swamp in order to cook the rice and give it to my children. There was a person who had died in the vehicle. There were people who were sick. And by that point, we were already calling them, "Comrade, this person is unwell, they're going to die." But this elicited no response. "Where are we going?" we asked them. And they simply replied, "Ankar will tell you." At Dusat, we waited there for 3 days. And on the third day, I noticed that we were next to a railway. And there was a convoy there. And then we were told you were going to get on those carts, but we didn't know where we were going. Counsel, pardon me for interrupting, Madame Afonso. You stated that there was no water. Can you please be more specific? There was no water? There was just a water hole. There was a swamp. But there was no proper clean water. So therefore you were forced to drink that water. Response, yes. Yes, it was with that water that I boiled water and cooked rice. And in that water it was full of human excrement. And it was only in daylight that one could perceive that. And when they placed us in the train, once again, we were expecting some information, but then we were told, "No, you're not going to leave tonight. You're going to sleep in the wagons." But there was nowhere to lie down. It was full of goods and merchandise. And so I slept in a sitting position with my daughter sitting in my lap.
Combien de temps a duré?
And how long was the journey by train? Response, well, I'm unable to answer that question. All I can say is that throughout the entire journey, I saw pass before me the names of villages such as Battambong. And we could see very well the scenery and the landscapes that we were passing. It was not closed. They had assembled the families in Krom. One family was a Krom. And we were taken to a mountainous area made up of Phnom Liap, Phnom Trayom, and Phnom Liap. And there were 3 elderly men who were dressed in black, and they were waiting for us. There was Puk Cheng, and I do not recall the names of the others. Puk Sam took us to the village of Phnom Tralok. And from that point onwards, there was a man who was wearing glasses. And he was told, "Do you need your glasses today?" And the gentleman said, "Oh, I don't see clearly." And then the soldier snatched the glasses off his face and trampled on them. But from the very beginning, I knew that this was the start of hell. But at every stage along the way, we were being promised paradise. And we were being ordered to work and work non-stop.
Mrs. Afonso, just to close on this transfer by truck to Pursat and then by train to Sisophone and then on a tractor to your final destination, to Phnom Lien. After that, we had to continue on foot to the village. Council. After these various sections of your journey, was it your impression that all of this had been planned and organized in advance? Response: yes, it had been planned in advance. As far as I was concerned, it was their way to very slowly kill us. It was programmed. We were in a rice exporting country, or at least previously. We had no rice to eat. A country full of fruit trees. For 4 years I never saw a single orange. We no longer had any medicines. We had no hygienic products either. No candles, no electricity, no water. We lived like people out of the caves. Council. During the transfer, were you supervised by Khmer Rouge throughout the journey? Response: from Soisifafun to Pursat, we were in the train, and from Soisifafun to Phnom Penh, they were with us, watching over us. Once we got to Phnom Penh, we were handed over to 3 village chiefs. Now, those 3 didn't carry weapons. It was when we got to Puk Sen village that they told me that henceforth you are the new people and we are the old people. And that's when they asked the children, my son and daughters, to take their things, because Angkar needed to take them to the work sites or to do whatever they had to do, and they took away my children on that very first day. Jean-Jacques was separated from me at that moment. I kept my daughter because she was too weak. She couldn't work. She was one more useless mouth to feed. All of the people who couldn't work were considered extra mouths to feed that Angkar didn't need. If they died, it would be no great loss to Angkar, quite the opposite. That was the basic lesson we were taught. Council. Can you describe the conditions you were living in the village? Can you tell us in particular if you had enough to eat, if the hygienic conditions were adequate, and if you had medicines for when you were sick? Response: everything was over by that stage. We were in purgatory in Cotonville, but at that last phase it was genuine hell. We had no water anymore. In order to get water, we had to march for kilometers under the sun in order to gather murky water, which we had to boil afterwards if we could. And we were told to look after ourselves, and that was it. I never knew how to make rice without water, but I had to find a way. It was the beginning of hell. We had no medicines either. We didn't have any medicines for when we were sick, and this was when we began to get malaria, edema, and everything hit us at that stage. There were no doctors. There was no kind of drugs or treatments available. In your application as a civil party, you say that you caught malaria, and although you were sick, you were still forced to work. Now, is that true? And if so, can you tell us about it? Response: the old people had found out who I was. They called me the old Barang, or my name Afonso became Fonso, and I was harassed from dawn to dusk, even when I had malaria and even when I couldn't leave the house. They pulled me out, kicked me, and said to me, "Old Fonso, stop pretending to be sick. There's nothing wrong with you. You're tall. You're going to go out and work." And I was kicked on my way, even when I was sick. They didn't have any idea of what being ill meant. I was constantly harassed by these nasty little Khmer Rouge. And I say nasty little because they were only about age 15 and they were people totally without any kind of training or education. Counsel, you say that you were harassed. Did the same thing happen to those living with you, your family, and the people who were with you in the village? Response. Well, as I said, I no longer saw my son, and the same thing happened to my sister-in-law. She was forced to go and work when she was sick. Some people managed to avoid this because they had a bit of gold to swap and to buy things. Those who still had jewelry to swap for rice and fish were left on their own, undisturbed, so to speak. Counsel. When you were ill and your sister-in-law was also ill, how were you able to look after yourself? Response. With the advice from the villagers, we took bark from the trees and mixed in some leaves, jackfruit leaves, and extracts of that kind. I didn't have any cardiac edema, and I survived, but my sister-in-law did, and she died. And when a member of your family dies, nobody comes to take note of the fact. There's no kind of civil registry. They come to the house and they say, "Here's one less mouth that we have to feed," and that was the only concept they had of the death. We had to bury our own dead as well. My son himself was badly treated. He was so traumatized that even today he doesn't want to even talk about this period. I can't bring him to testify. I can't ask him to help me testify, because once when I found his body covered with the marks where he had been beaten, and he can't even see scenes of being beaten, people being beaten on TV without suffering. Counsel, do you know why he was beaten? Response, because like all children of his age, once he went to find wood in the forest, and they picked up some wood that had been already cut by somebody else. The Schlop caught them, and they were accused of theft, and they said, "You're going to be punished as you deserve," and they were taken off to a field where they had to dig all day without anything to eat or drink, and in the evening they were released. When I saw them coming back home in the evening, they had all sorts of scars and marks on his body, but he didn't want to tell me what had happened to him or what they had done to him. Counsel. You said that your sister-in-law died because of the lack of any kind of care. Did you testify to any other deaths in the village? And if so, what kind? Response. Every day people died in the village. Every morning they were hauling away a corpse. We weren't the only family to lose people. Other people died every day through lack of care, lack of medicines because they were sick and nobody was looking after them, or of hunger and malnutrition. sickness, absence of food. Council. Mrs. Afonso, a moment ago you said that in the village the distinction that was drawn between the new and the old people was very obvious. Can you give us some idea of the consequences of the distinction that was drawn there? Response, well, it was very obvious because, for example, with the distribution of rice, we had one portion of rice and they had two. Their women did not work. They had enough to eat. Their women also were able to give birth. I saw 2 pregnant women like that, and they had enough to eat. We did not have enough to eat. They had meat and fish. We only had salt with our rice, and we only ate rice porridge. We were only entitled to 2 meals a day, and each time it was just a ladle of that porridge. Otherwise, what did we eat? Frogs, grasshoppers, and scorpions. Anything I could pick up in the countryside I ate. We even ate cockroaches when we found some. We had turned into animals. We fought over scraps of food with their dogs, and their dogs had more to eat than we did. Is that what you call equal treatment? Council. So you underwent these conditions in the village, and you didn't have enough to eat, as a result of which did you lose members of your family? My sister-in-law... Interruption, says the interpreter.
The President, Council, for the answer team, you may now proceed. Council Ang Uddam. Thank you, Mr. President. Correct me if I am wrong, but I am ambivalent as to whether the civil party is allowed to testify regarding the entire case file or just particular segment of the trial. If she is allowed to do so, I would not take issue with this. But if she is allowed to testify concerning only the segment of the trial, which is case file 002/01, then her current testimony is now stepping over that boundary already. And counsel were asking question about the loss of her family members. I believe that it would be better if counsel wait until the moment when she is allowed to give the to talk about the statement of suffering.
Monsieur le Président, il ne s'agit pas de...
Council, I don't think here we are testifying on the entire story. Here we're just talking about the immediate effects of the first and second forced transfer episodes. Mrs. Afonso said that the conditions and the hygiene and the food provisions in the village did have consequences on members of her family, and so I'm asking her what such consequences were. We can make that a little wider if you wish and ask her what the consequences were of such conditions in the village on other members of her family.
Oui, dans ce village, justement.
Response. In the village, my sister-in-law was the first to fall ill.
The President, Madam Civil Party, could you please hold on? The Chamber is now ruling on the objection by the party. The President, the objection by counsel for Mr. Ieng Seri with regard to the line of questioning by counsel for the civil parties is not substantiated and therefore is not sustained because the account in the civil parties testimony is somewhat what that happened immediately after the evacuation. Due to technical issue, as the CD has run out, we would like to observe a brief pause so that the new CD is replaced, and we would then proceed.
Ah, mais j'aimerais bien, parce que si c'est des paroles qui se perdent, non. Ah, non, non.
The President, Madam Civil Party, You are now instructed to respond to the question just put to you by counsel for the civil parties. You may proceed.
Yes. I was saying that during that period I lost my sister-in-law. After that I lost my daughter, who died of hunger, because on the morning where she was going to die, the only thing she asked me was, "Mummy, I want one more bowl of rice." But there weren't any bowls of rice going that day. An hour after she died, my niece also passed away. So that day I had to bury the two bodies myself. Nobody came to help us. And 1 week after that, it was the elder niece who also passed away. She died of sheer weakness. She was no longer menstruating, and she died. The third niece also died a week later. I lost all those family members, and the last small nephew died when he was slaughtered by the Khmer Rouge because he stole food from Madame Chen, who was the wife of the village chief. Council, thank you, Mrs. Afonso. I want to ask you a last question about these events. And I want to quote the record of your interview of your hearing of the 7th of September 2009. This is document D199/15, and I refer to page 7. The ERN is 00342184 in French, 00346936 in English, and 00349120 in Khmer. And in that interview, you said that the Angkar organization, the Khmer Rouge, were very well structured and all decisions were explained to us as coming from Angkar. You also said, just let me finish, madam, and then you can explain this to us afterwards, but you also said, I now think that the Khmer Rouge leaders wanted to eliminate what they called the new people by letting us die of hunger and disease. Can you please tell us what brought you to make that statement? Response. I said that in 2009, and I maintain today what I said then. I said the same in 1979, and I stand by that too. Angkar wanted to eliminate the entire social class of intellectuals. That was programmed. They had taken a decision to do so. They were intentionally letting us die of hunger. After each monsoon, they loaded up the rice stocks from the village. They left a minimum amount for us to have 2 bowls of soup or porridge per day, and they took all the rest away. And we simply had to comply. Only during the monsoon did we have just about enough to eat, and we had enough strength to finish the harvest. Once that was over, they took all the rice away that was left. We were eating gruel and salt, and that was perfectly well organized. They gave us no treatment, no drugs, no medicines. That was on purpose. It was carefully premeditated and organized from A to Z. They were extremely well organized.
Vous dites que dans
Council, you say in the same statement that all of the explanations for everything came from Ankara. Can you give us a couple of examples, please? Response. I can't give you a precise example, but every time they addressed us, it was in the name of Ankara. Everything that they asked us to do was in the name of Ankara. Today, comrade, you're going to work a little bit harder because Ankara says you must. Tomorrow you will have 3 meals. If we can have 3 harvests per day, then you will have your meals. We're asking you to build more dikes. Ankara has decided this is going to be called the Dyke of the Widows for us. And in fact, it was by that choice of name that I knew that for quite a while the father of my children had been dead, because the only people building that particular dike were women from what they called traitorous families. I was on the team building the widow's dike. Council, thank you, Mrs. Afonso. Mr. President, I have no further questions to ask, so I would like to hand the floor over to the co-prosecutors. Thank you.
The President, thank you, Council. I would like now to hand over to the co-prosecutor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to you and to the members of the bench, to all the parties, and good afternoon as well to you, Mrs. Afonso, who is testifying from France, and we're most grateful to you for doing that. We have 30 minutes of questions to ask you, divided between my colleague and myself. I just want to follow up on some of the details you have given us, very rich in details your account was, so I just want to ask for a little bit of clarification. Coming back to the evacuation of Phnom Penh and even the days just before, you said that there was constant bombardment, fighting, shells going off. Were there a good many injured people in the city's hospitals at the time? Response: yes, every day injured and wounded people came back from the front. These were Lon Nol troops. They were wounded. The hospitals were crammed with injured people, wounded people. I was well aware of the situation because we knew the director of the military pension fund, and we saw him practically every day, and he was keeping us abreast of what was going on the front. Prosecution, you said that you lived near the Chinese hospital and you saw the sick being evacuated. As far as you are aware, were all of the sick evacuated from that hospital? Response: yes, all of the sick were evacuated from that hospital. The hospital was cleared out. When we got to the hospital, we could see people coming out of the hospital, which had been completely emptied of its patients. Thank you. Question: you said that on the 17th of April the population was only too delighted to welcome the Khmer Rouge soldiers, but how did those soldiers behave with the population? Did they demonstrate their happiness and share their feelings with the population, or did they adopt a somewhat different attitude towards the population? Response: they looked at the population with disdain. The population's happiness meant absolutely nothing to them. As I told you, I saw them. They didn't smile. They looked at us with disdain. Question: when the order was given to evacuate the city, Did you hear the Khmer Rouge shouting the order in the streets, or did they come to your homes to tell you about the order? Response: they went through the streets, they were shouting the orders in the streets, and then individually they went to each house and each apartment to repeat the order that we had to evacuate the city. Question: you said just now that the order was to leave the city for 2 or 3 days because of the risk of US bombing. Did you ever hear the Khmer Rouge saying on the morning of 18th of April that they had to cleanse and bring order to the city? Response: the excuse for us leaving our homes was definitely US bombing. They said the Americans are going to bomb the capital city. We want to take you to safety and you have to leave your homes. That's it. Thank you. Question: you said that they were carrying weapons when they gave that order to evacuate the city, but they didn't aim their guns at you. And despite the fact that you were not physically threatened, when the order was given to pack and leave, did you have any choice, as far as you understood at the time, between leaving and staying? Response: we had absolutely no choice whatsoever. The order was extremely clear. They didn't give us any choice at all. They didn't say, if you don't want to leave, you can stay. No, that was a categorical order. You had to get up and leave your home.
Thank you. In your interview before the co-investigating judges, you stated in D199/15 on page 3 of the French and English versions, and on page 6 of the Khmer, ERN 00349101. You said that when you left Phnom Penh by car, the car was actually too small to hold all of you, and that your rather simple-minded brother had to follow behind on bicycle. Can you please tell us what happened to your younger brother-in-law in April 1975, and if ever since you have heard from him or about him? Response: no. We never saw him again. In the chaotic, calamitous situation, we lost sight of him. There was already one soldier on the roof of the car who was insisting that we leave very quickly. Therefore, the car left very quickly. And the brother was following by bike. He was also hauling a chicken cage. And ever since, I've never heard from him. I've not heard any news of him. Already at the time, he spoke very seldomly, and he was rather simple-minded. Prosecution. You also talked about other vulnerable people, those who had been evacuated from the hospitals. Did the Khmer Rouge take any measures to make sure that the vulnerable, the infirmed, could survive the evacuation of Phnom Penh in the high heat of Phnom Penh? Was there any provision of medical care, any distribution of water or medication? Response: no. Mr. Prosecutor, there was absolutely no assistance being given by the Khmer Rouge soldiers. No one was helped. No. There was absolutely no help whatsoever. As I said earlier, it was every man for himself. No one helped anyone. Prosecution. And so if it was every man for himself, and during the time that you were leaving Phnom Penh by car, did you see people on foot and who collapsed on the side of the road because they simply could not carry on and follow the crowds? Response: Yes, yes, there were very many elderly people who were struggling to walk. But we could not stop to help them. But indeed, there were people who were experiencing great difficulty moving. We had no idea where we were going. That was even worse. Prosecution, thank you. Earlier, you talked about the corpses of Lono soldiers you saw at Chamkarmon. And once you left Phnom Penh heading towards Takmau and Tukville, did you see any other dead bodies strewn along the roadside? And were you able to identify those corpses? Response, yes. The first dead body I saw was that of a Lono soldier. I recognize this because he was in uniform, but all along the road there were other people, such as civilians, who had been eliminated. And there were other corpses, but once again, I repeat, I did not stop. I did not go back on my steps. I did not return on my footsteps to find out why they died or how they died, but I saw corpses strewn along the road. Prosecution. And those corpses were not in uniform? Were they civilians? Response. Indeed, they were civilians. Prosecution, thank you. And once you arrived at Tukville in April, on the 19th of April, if I'm not mistaken, you stated that you arrived at Tukville Island on the 20th of April. Were you asked to give your opinion or any feedback prior to your transfer to Tukville? Response, not at all. What we thought didn't matter. The village chief came with an entire team, and he handpicked everyone who had arrived by car and said, you, go over there. We're going to take you. We were given absolutely no choice. Prosecution, thank you. And the day that you arrived on the island and during subsequent days, approximately how many families that had been evacuated from Phnom Penh were selected to live on Tukville Island? Response. If memory serves me correctly, I believe that there must have been a dozen or so families on Tukville Island, but I don't have the exact figure. I'm sorry, I just do not recall 32 years after the fact. Thank you. And on the 20th of April, you arrived on Tukville Island. You had been there for 3 days. Or rather, this was the third day after the evacuation. At some point in time, did any Khmer Rouge soldier or Khmer Rouge official appear before you and tell you why you would not be returning to Phnom Penh as you had been originally promised? Did they provide you any justification? Response, no. No one said anything after 3 days. We received absolutely no information. The village chief, Mr. Tien, who I called Mr. Tiem, provided absolutely no details. And it was only then, 1 week later, that we were summoned to the meeting, the famous meeting in the pagoda. And we were announced the demise that awaited us. Prosecution. Earlier you stated that there were a certain number of Khmer Rouge uncles called Tassem, Tachi. They were Khmer Rouge soldiers, and among them, did anyone speak out during the meeting in the pagoda at Pretuk? Response, no. They came to speak, but they did not introduce themselves. Prosecution, thank you. And during that meeting in the pagoda, you were told that you were prisoners of Ankar. In addition, you said that you were in an open prison. And from the 17th of April 1975 to the 7th of January 1979, from the time of the evacuation to your time in Tocqueville to the northwest, were you able to enjoy any form of individual or collective freedom or liberty that would give you the impression that you were not a prisoner of Ankar? Response. I stated that I was in an open prison, but in fact we were there prisoners because everywhere we went, we were weeded out, we were recorded and registered, we were ordered not to leave. Every time that we went to work in the fields, either in the rice fields or the manioc fields, we were under watch. There was always somebody behind you surveying your work up until you entered your home. Prosecution, and earlier you stated that Mr. Chen in Tocqueville Island had talked about disciplinary codes and the need to dress in black and carry out certain tasks. Did Mr. Chen enforce the orders of Ankar? Response. We received the 10 Commandments of Ankar. I don't know them by heart, and I'm unable to recite them to you now, but they were all recommendations, a list of prohibitions. We were told that we could not beat our own children, that our children had become the children of Ankar, that we had to work, that we had to engage in self-criticism. And every single night, at every single meeting, we had to attend self-criticism sessions. And in fact, there were brainwashing sessions. I wrote the recommendations on the palm of my hand. However, I had to write it phonetically. Prosecution. And among those commandments, were you expected to be completely submissive to Ankar as an individual and as an evacuee? Response, absolutely. From that day onwards, we were the property of Ankar. That was made crystal clear. Thank you. When Mr. Chen told you to leave because your name figured on the list and you asked him where, were his orders not subject to any sort of appeal or challenge? Response, Mr. Chen's list came from above, and it was a final list. It was not subject to any appeal or argument. We did not know where we were going. We did not know of our second destination. We didn't even know of our third destination. Prosecution. And during your transfer towards the northwest region by lorry, as you were heading towards Persat, aside from those who had traveled from Tocqueville and who were accompanying you, were there any people from other areas who were headed in the same direction and who were part of the same journey? Response. Yes, there were some refugees from Phnom Penh. At the time, we were still called refugees. There were also residents from other villages in the surrounding area that were there. There were approximately 10 trucks that were in a motorcade and were waiting to pick up people. Prosecution, and after your transfer by truck, you arrived in Pursat, and were there a good number of people who had been transferred or evacuated and who had actually already been there by the time you arrived? Response: yes, in fact, the place was overflowing with people. The place, there were people from Phnom Penh, and there were people who had already arrived prior to our arrival. Thank you. And do you know where those people came from? Do you know where they had been transferred from? If they had indeed been transferred like you towards Pursat? Response: I have no idea. At the time, we weren't concerned with that matter. My main preoccupation at the time was to make sure that my children were all right. My daughter was already in the midst of dying. We didn't think about the outcome of those people. No. Prosecution, in short, what you're telling us with respect to the second transfer is that you left Tocqueville because your name was on a list. It was an order issued by Mr. Chin. You were transported by truck with other evacuees, and then you were shipped onto a train, and you headed towards Pursat. You were then gathered in a general assembly area, and then you were screened and split up and redistributed to several villages. Is it on the basis of those facts that you would say that the evacuation as planned by the Khmer Rouge was organized and planned? Response: before Phnom Lip, there was Sisaphon. We were in Sisaphon, and we arrived there by tractor. And at that point, they had regrouped families. There were about 10 families that were subsumed under a Krum in Khmer. And then a Krum was taken by tractor until Phnom Liap. And from that point onwards, everything was very highly well organized and highly structured and monitored. But we were still in the dark. We had absolutely no idea where we would end up. Prosecution: a witness: the children had no idea. Prosecution: and you said, if I'm not mistaken, several times you were shipped off like packs of animals and herded onto trains and trucks. Did you receive any form of subsistence during those journeys, food or drink? Response: not at all, not at all. What we fed our children was what we took ourselves from the pagodas. But while we were traveling, nobody gave us anything. Nobody told us where we were going. Nobody told us that we would be stopping to take a break so that we could fulfill our needs. We were told nothing. We were just shipped off in the trucks. There was absolutely no assistance whatsoever. Prosecution: one final question before I cede the floor over to my colleague. In Phnom Liap, when you were chosen to go to Phnom Trayok, were you able to manifest or express your opinion? Did you have any discretion to choose the place where you would go to? Response: most unfortunately, no. If I had the choice, I would have gone elsewhere. I would have gone to another world, but we had absolutely no choice. Thank you very much, Madame Afonso. I wish now to hand the floor over to my colleague, who will ask questions for the 10 remaining questions. Witness: thank you very much, Mr. Co-Prosecutor.
Mr. Chandararasmai. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors, and very good afternoon to you, Madam Dennis Afonso. I am Chandararasmai, National Co-Prosecutor. I have a few follow-up questions. Madam Afonso, can you please tell the Chamber about the orders for the evacuation of the population of the capital city of Phnom Penh? Did Khmer Rouge tell you and other people how you would be evacuated from the city? Were there any kind of assistance given to you for the transportation of the people out of the city?
When they gave us the order to leave Phnom Penh, as I said and as I repeat, they simply stated, "You are going to leave for only 2 or 3 days. Do not take too much with you. Take the bare minimum. You are going to return. Give us your keys." And when we left, nobody told us where we were going. Nobody told us which direction we were heading into. We were simply told, "Angkor is waiting for you." But we were given absolutely no assistance. We were given absolutely no instructions.
Thank you. Question. Did they tell you how you could be transported or were you allowed to bring with you some food stuff?
They did not tell us how we would be transported. They simply said, "You must leave your houses. Take the bare minimum." That's all we had as instructions. But out of precaution, I took a little bit more. And I was hoping that by telling them that I was a French national, that I could go to the French embassy. But that was not the case. Because I was with the Chinese and I was with some Vietnamese and I was assimilated. But otherwise I wanted to go to the embassy.
Thank you. Question. Were you and the other members of your family checked when you were leaving the city?
When we left our homes and when we were on Monivong Boulevard headed towards Tak Mau, there were no searches, at least at that time. And then just as we were heading near the ends of the road, there were 3 soldiers that had asked to come with us. And it was only at the first posting that they had us exit the car, brandish our belongings and our identity cards, and I showed them my consular card, I showed them my French passport, and I tried to show them that I was a French national. Please let me return to the French embassy. They took my papers and they destroyed everything.
Question. What was the Khmer Rouge's reaction towards you when learning that you were of French national and that your daughters, your children, how were they treated? The President, Madam Civil Party, could you please hold on? Council Kanawaz, you may now proceed first.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon, witness. My deepest apologies for objecting, but now 4 questions, 4 out of 4, all repetitive. There is nothing new. Now, if the gentleman could kindly take a second or two to look through his questions. If there's something that hasn't been asked, he can ask it. Otherwise, I think it's best to just end it here for the day. But we're not learning anything new, and we're just re-traumatizing a traumatized witness. Thank you. A civil party. Pardon me.
Mr. Chandararesmai, thank you, Mr. President. I was asking because I would like to seek some clarification. Otherwise, I would like now to turn to other questions. Madam Civil Party, during the Khmer Rouge regime, did you notice that the money still was circulated? And did you see that the money was still circulated in the areas where you went?
No.
No. When we arrived at Tocqueville, currency had already been abolished. There was no currency in circulation. People were operating within a bartering system. There was no currency.
Thank you. Question. At Tocqueville, you were forced to hard labor. Do you know from whom the instructions for people to work that hard could have been rendered?
The instructions were coming from Ankar. Ankar said that from this day onwards, you must work. Children must work. Children may no longer study. Children may no longer play. My daughter, who had her doll, a Christmas present given to her at a party at the French embassy, the doll was taken from her and thrown on the ground. From that day onwards, children were no longer able to play.
Thank you. Have you ever met Mr. Ieng Sari, Kyu Sompon and Nuon Chia during the time when you worked at the work site?
I never even heard the utterance of their names, much less have met them. I never met them and I never heard their names.
Thank you. I have the final question to you, please. Every time you were convened to a meeting, who did you meet as the chairman of each meeting, and what was the subject matter of the meetings?
Every evening, we began by reciting the commandments, and it was repeatedly spoken that we had to obey Ankar and that we had to perform hard work, and if during the day we had committed any sort of offense, we had to disclose the act, we had to criticize ourselves before everyone else.
Thank you, Madam Civil Party. Due to time constraints, I would like to end my questions now, and I thank you very much indeed for your responses. Your testimony is very useful for our mission to search for the truth. Mr. President, I thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to put questions to her, and I have no further questions indeed. The President, since it is now appropriate time for today adjournment, the Chamber will adjourn. The President continues. We, the Chamber, would also wish to know, in particular with regard the video conference and its technicality, we would like to ask counsels for the accused person whether they would like to have some questions to the civil party. If yes, how much time would they prefer? And we would start to hear from counsel for Mr. Nuon Chea first.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will have to look through my notes of today and look at the transcript, but I think I will need about an hour of questioning tomorrow afternoon, rather.
The President, Counsel Ang Udam, you may now proceed. Counsel Ang Udam, thank you, Mr. President, and your honors. We so far have no plan to put some questions to the civil party. However, we would have some reservation if after counsels for Mr. Nuon Chea have put some questions, we may revisit our position to see whether we have a few questions to clarify, perhaps. Counsel for Mr. Kiew Sampon. Thank you, Mr. President. For the time being, we do not have any questions we aim to put to the civil party, but we will inform the Chamber accordingly if we change this position. The President, thank you, counsels. We are now well informed. Again, since it is now appropriate time for the adjournment, the Chamber will adjourn, and the next session will be resumed tomorrow by 9 a.m. The Chamber continues to hear the testimony of witness Pan Wan in the morning, and in the afternoon session, the Chamber continues hearing Madam Civil Party through video conference. Madam and Dennis Afonso, your testimony is not yet concluded. The Chamber wishes to hear you again during tomorrow afternoon Cambodia time, as we do today, and we would like to summon you to the same place you are now sitting so that you could provide this testimony again. For today's session, it is now time for the adjournment, and the Chamber wishes to thank you, Madam Afonso, and your counsel very much indeed.
Merci, monsieur.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The President, court officer is now instructed to assist with the vessel unit and the AV booth officers to ensure that tomorrow's session through video conference can be properly managed as what we have seen today, and security personnel are now instructed to bring all the accused persons back to the detention center and have them returned to the courtroom by 9 a.m. tomorrow, except Mr. Ieng Sari, who shall only be brought to his holding cell where he could observe the proceedings from there. The court is adjourned.